hello everyone. I will give a second for people to get on, but I will just tell you a little bit about myself. So my name is Rebecca Scaris, and I am the video coordinator at Immigrant Services Calgary. Currently, I'm working on the Smart Tips video series project, which is a project that was started about over a year ago. And it involves the production of a series of videos that are easy to understand, situational, that are about settlement information for newcomers. The videos are available in simple English, and we also have them translated and subtitled into Arabic, Chinese, French, Hindi, Spanish, Tigrinya, and Farsi. So we have seven languages. So the videos are to help newcomers get information and resources that are helpful for them to start a new life in Alberta. At this moment, we currently have 9 published videos and another 6 are on their way. At the end, we will have 15 videos. Today, we will be talking about our first video, which is how to rent a home. So we are very lucky. We are joined by our expert today, Nikki Petrowitz from the Calgary Residential Rental Association. And I will give a little bit background about her and the organization. So the Calgary Residential Rental Association, or CRRA, is the largest residential rental association in Alberta. The CRRA was formed in 1959 and is a registered nonprofit society. Its primary purpose is to help members of the association succeed in their rental businesses by giving support and guidance. So today we are joined by Nikki from CRRA, and Nikki is the administrator at CRRA and has been with the association since 2014. She is the first point of contact for CRRA and has a vast knowledge of the Residential Tenancy Act of Alberta. She has taught the tenant course Renting in Alberta to several different community groups, including Calgary Immigrant Women's Association, or CIWA, and the Center for Newcomers. She's originally from Vancouver Island, BC, and Nikki and her husband moved to Alberta in 2013. In her spare time, Nikki is an avid knitter and enjoys knitting accessories for her husband and 4 cats. Okay, so welcome, Nikki, and thank you so much for being here. So today's presentation is kind of going to be a little more casual than normal. So me and Nikki are going to talk a little and have some conversation, but she's also going to give a small presentation about renting in Alberta. So I am going to start by showing our first Smart Tips video on renting, and then me and Nikki will start our conversation.
The Chan family has recently moved to Alberta and are looking to rent their first home. They have already visited several other properties listed on rental websites and have chosen one that suits their family's needs best.
This unit is nice, clean and bright, and I think that has more nearby with grocery store and doctor's clinic and even a very good coffee shop. Hey John, do you like it?
Oh yes, I do. Yeah, the neighbor's nice and the location is great, and it's close to a train station, so that I'm easy to get to work.
Mm-hmm. But the sad thing is, the landlord won't allow us to have any pets in the apartment.
Come on, yeah. At least he's giving us a free parking stall so that we can look for a new car soon.
Oh really?
Yeah. Sure.
Okay, that's great. Let's hurry up.
Yeah, it's good.
Mr. and Mrs. Chan,
Hi.
good to see you.
Yeah, how are you doing?
Good, yeah, please come in.
Thank you. How are you doing?
Good. Glad to know you like my apartment.
Yes, it's great.
Let's do a final inspection before we sit down and review the contract.
Oh no, it's okay. We trust you.
Well, actually, we're required to inspect the unit with our renters to note the condition of anything and any existing damage. You know you'll be charged for any damage that isn't noted in the original final inspection.
Oh,
so
okay.
please take a minute to look around and check things out.
Okay.
Okay, so any issues?
Yeah, everything seems to be good. Yeah, but only two minor problems.
Oh.
Yeah, one is the tap of the kitchen is dripping. Yeah, and also the toilet of the master bedroom is flushing but not very well.
Okay.
So would you mind fixing them before we move in?
No problem. I can have those looked at tomorrow at the latest.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, well, if there's nothing else, just have a look at this inspection report.
Okay,
And if it looks okay, I just need your signature there.
okay, sure.
Hey, Tim, this is the documents you request, our bank statements and the references.
Let's have a quick look. That looks great. Okay, this looks fantastic. Well, if that looks all right to you, let's go over the rental agreement together.
Okay, good.
A rental contract is to be signed by both the landlord and the renter, also known as the tenant. Before the tenant moves in, this contract should include the following information: monthly rental amount, length of the lease, contract term, periodic or fixed, meaning monthly or yearly, what utilities, water, gas, electricity are included, whether parking space is included, and any other special provisions. Be sure to read the fine print and understand all the terms before signing. Also, be sure to obtain a copy of the signed inspection report and rental contract.
Are there any questions?
No, yeah, actually you explained very clearly.
Great.
That's good.
Then I just need your signature here,
Okay,
and I'll need a security deposit of 1 month's rent.
Okay, here is the check.
Okay, great. Fantastic. Well, I will sign this, and I'll give you the keys.
yes, great.
And you can
great.
move in anytime you like.
Thank you very much, Tim.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving into a new home is exciting. Here are a few smart tips. The landlord must give 24 hours written notice prior to entering a tenant's suite to carry out repairs, or inspect the unit, or show the unit to other prospective renters. Landlords cannot increase rent until a minimum of 1 year has passed since the start of tenancy or the last rent increase. Some of your responsibilities as a tenant include paying the rent in full on time, keeping the rental premises clean and in good condition, being considerate of the landlord and other tenants. Being well informed about correct renting practices is the first step to happy renting.
Okay. So yeah, that is our first Smart Tips video we ever made. So about renting. So Nikki, what was your involvement in this process?
Well, the CRRA provided the lease agreement and the inspection report that was featured in that video. And we were also asked for what were the basics in each one of those and why they were necessary. And we were more than happy to work with the team on that. And then a few editorial comments that were made just to make sure everything was in line with the Residential Tenancies Act.
Sounds good. Yeah, definitely. Like we always partner with other organizations for these videos because I'm not a renting expert or a money expert or a fraud expert. There's many videos that I'm not an expert with. So we were really happy to have a partner on it that knows so much about renting. So what kind of struggles do you think newcomers have with renting? And how do they make sure that they don't have those struggles?
Okay, the biggest struggle that newcomers would have, as well as anybody new to the rental market, would be understanding what you're responsible for and what you have a right to. So understanding that you need to pay the rent on time when it's due, and also understanding that you have the right to get a notice from your landlord before they can enter the property. Those are the key things, just the basic understanding of what you're entitled to do and what you're required to do.
Exactly. That's good. That's good advice. Yeah, they should know what they're getting into. Yeah. Okay. I have your presentation here. So you're going to answer a bunch of questions I think people have. So what should landlords take care of? What should renters take care of? The process of how do you rent, right? So we'll get that started now, and you can talk about that. So I'll just share your presentation.
Excellent.
Okay. And let me know when you want to change slides.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Okay, so you can change to the next slide, please.
Okay.
The first slide, we're talking about the Residential Tenancies Act, or the RTA. Everything gets acronyms in this industry. So the RTA is the piece of legislation or laws that govern or oversee residential rentals in Alberta. So anywhere someone lives and they're renting, these laws apply. The places where the RTA does not apply are when it comes to hotels, student housing. If you and your landlord are living in the same house and you share a kitchen and a bathroom, the RTA doesn't apply in this. And it defines the rules for landlords and tenants that they have to follow in Alberta. Next slide. So what problems can you face? We already sort of touched on this. And if you don't know what you can and cannot do as a renter, that can be a really big problem. The same goes for what your landlord can and can't do. Having a knowledgeable tenant and having a knowledgeable landlord means a happy tenancy, or the relationship between landlord and tenant. Next slide. So when we talk about what a tenant must do, we're talking about tenants' covenants. And a covenant is a rule that you must follow. So a tenant's covenant is a rule a tenant must follow. Rule number 1, the most important rule, is you must pay your rent when it is due, the whole amount. Rule number 2 is you cannot interfere with the rights of your landlord or another tenant's right, meaning you can't be noisy and have a party in the middle of the night. Or you cannot change the locks on your landlord. Those are very important rules. You also cannot perform illegal acts on the rental property. This means operating an illegal business or conducting yourself in an illegal manner. That basically means committing a crime on the property. You cannot endanger other persons on the property, so you can't do anything that would hurt anybody. And you must not cause any property damage, whether intentional or not. Damage is damage, whether you meant to do it or it was an accident. You must make sure the rental property is kept in a reasonably clean condition. So keep it tidy. You don't have to keep it spotless. We know people live there, but keeping it tidy. And number 7, you must move out of the rental property when your time there has ended, whether you've been given an eviction notice, or you've chosen to leave, or the lease has come to an end. You must leave when it is your time. Go to the next slide, please. The landlord's covenants. So like I said, a covenant is something you must do. A landlord covenant is a rule a landlord must follow. And the landlords have 5, and it's very important for tenants to know this. Yes, it applies to the landlord, but if you know what you are entitled to or what you have a right to as a renter, it's very important. 2 sides of the same coin. Rule number 1, a landlord must make sure the rental property is available for you to move into. So if it's not ready when you are supposed to move in, that is a big no-no for a landlord. The landlord must make sure the tenant has peaceful enjoyment of their rental property. They can't interfere with your rights. So this coincides with rule number 2 for the tenants. They can't interfere with your rights. You can't interfere with their rights. And a way that this would be interfered with is if the landlord doesn't give you that 24-hour notice to come in to the rental property, to come into your home. If they don't give you that notice, they're not allowed to come in. The rental unit must meet minimum housing and health standards. This is very important. If you think that the house that you're living in and that you're renting is not meeting minimum health and safety standards, you can contact Alberta Health Services and have an inspector come check it out for you. There's no cost and you will never be in trouble for doing that. It's something that you have the right to do. A landlord must provide a written notice of landlord within 7 days of either taking over your property or you moving in. So this means they tell you, this is my name, here's how you can contact me, whether it's phone, email, cell phone, whatever, and here's a physical address that you can reach me at. If they don't give you that, you can ask, and if they fail to give it to you, that's another big no-no. They have to give you that physical address. And of course, number 5, which falls in line with rule number 2, the landlord must give the tenant proper notice before entering the rental property. That's written on a piece of paper, stating why they want to come in. Are they coming to do an inspection? Are they coming to fix something, etc.? Or are they coming to show the unit to somebody else? So they have to say why they're coming in, what date they're coming in, and they can only give it to you no less than 24 hours before they're going to come in. So they have to give you a minimum of 24 hours. Next slide. So when we talk about tenancy, what is a tenancy? The technical term is when a tenant has possession of a rental property. When we talk about it here at the CRRA, we talk about it as the relationship between landlord and tenant. So what does that mean? It's when the two of you coexist or work together in a rental property. They're renting it to you, you're renting it from them. It's a tenancy. And there's 2 different kinds of tenancies in Alberta. There is the periodic, which is month to month. So that's the one where it just keeps going. It goes month by month by month, and it goes until one of you, either the landlord or yourself, says, I'm done, and you have a reason to do so, or it just keeps going. That's all. A fixed term is one you're more than likely going to see. It's very popular here in Alberta. It's called the fixed term. So it has a start date and an end date. And during that start date and end date, nothing can change. Your landlord is not allowed to increase the rent. You're also not allowed to make changes in there either. So everything stays the same. It is fixed. It doesn't move. Okay? Next slide, please. So when you rent in Alberta, the video that you saw was a great way of breaking down the basics of renting. So moving in, the first thing they did in the video when they got in there was they did the inspection. That happens, but before you get to that, you're going to discuss the rental contract and conditions. That basically goes over how much money you're going to pay each month and what expectations the landlord has. Does this mean that you're not allowed to have pets? Does this mean that you're not allowed to smoke in the property? Does this mean that you're not allowed X amount of people? So you're not allowed to have more than the people who've signed a lease live there. These are the rules that the landlord is saying, this is what you have to follow to live in this property. Everything should be discussed before you sign the lease. The upfront expenses. What is this going to cost you? Do you need to get money together for the rent and the security deposit? Yes. Do you need furniture? Is this a pre-furnished unit, or is it somewhere where you have to bring your own furniture? Those are questions you need to ask and think about before you say yes to a rental unit or a rental property, pardon me. You need to figure that out first to make sure you can afford to live there, because the last thing we want anywhere to happen is someone gets in there and they can't remain in the property because they can't afford it. really important that you calculate your monthly expenses and what you need up front in order to move into the property. Tenant screening. The landlord has the right to conduct screening to see if you are a good fit for the rental property. So, do you make enough money? Do you have enough income? Are you a good tenant? Have you been a good tenant for somebody else? Things like that. Some may ask for a credit report. So they might conduct a tenant credit check. Others may ask for references. And some may ask, if you are not able to qualify on your own, they may ask for someone to co-sign with you to make sure that you do qualify. The next step is a security deposit. In Alberta, you are only allowed as a landlord to take 1 month's worth of rent up front for the security deposit. Meaning when you move in, you could be asked to pay 2 months rent up front. So you have your first month's rent and the security deposit. The security deposit, if it exceeds more than 1 month, don't sign a lease and tell them that's not allowed. If it's less than 1 month, that's okay. There are other people who don't feel it's necessary to charge anything more than maybe half a month's rent or $500. But a landlord can charge up to 1 month's rent for the security deposit. Anything more than that, big no-no. The walkthrough inspection. As that video beautifully displayed, it's not just so you can look at the rental unit. It's to make sure you know what condition that rental unit is in before you move in your belongings and you take on the lease for this place. It's so very important that you participate in that and you pay attention. Your landlord may take pictures while they're doing the inspection. You should be taking pictures too. We think it's great when tenants get involved and they take pictures of the rental property. So it's fantastic if you can do that so that you have your documentation and your landlord has their documentation. The tenancy agreement. Some people call it a lease agreement. Some people call it the landlord's agreement. Some people call it the tenant agreement. Whatever it is, it's officially called the residential tenancy agreement. We call it leases here in this office. But we know what you're talking about if you use a different word. That is so important because if there's no lease signed, the only rules you have to follow are the ones that we talked about earlier in the tenant's covenants. And the only rules the landlord has to follow are what we talked about earlier in the landlord's covenants. So you want to make sure you have that security of having a signed lease. Okay, that means you have documentation to show how much you paid for the security deposit up front. You have documentation that shows this is my physical address. Very important if you're looking at bank accounts or you're looking at any kind of financial thing, you need something that shows your physical address, and having that lease agreement is so important. When you take possession of a rental property, that's when you get the keys. That's when you've signed the lease agreement. It's when you've done that move-in report and you get handed those keys. It's one of the best moments for landlords and tenants is when you get those keys. After that, you can start moving in your belongings and you can get all set up and make it your home. It's no longer a rental unit, it is your home. The cleaning list is something the landlord may talk to you about, and that's what they expect when you move out. Here is the condition of the rental property, which is now your home. And here's the condition I would like it when it gets returned to me as a rental property. Okay. And the last one I'm going to touch on for moving in is tenant insurance. Your landlord may tell you you need tenant insurance in order to live here. And I would say that's a very good thing to have because tenant insurance does two things. The first one being, if there is any damage to your home, the landlord's insurance will not cover your belongings. So anything that's not covered that comes with the lease, so the 4 walls and any appliances that were included, anything beyond that will not be covered by the landlord's insurance. So your tenant insurance will cover that. The other part of the tenant insurance that is so important is, say, for example, something has happened where your home needs extensive work, whether there was a water leak or, heaven forbid, a fire. Your landlord is not responsible for putting you up in alternate or different accommodation. Tenant insurance covers that for you. So you're not going to be set with additional costs and more financial requirements because it's going to be covered for you. So it's very important. And tenant insurance can be as little as $12 a month. Some places are a little bit higher, but the average is around $12 a month. Go to the next slide, please, Rebecca. So as I said earlier, changing the locks. This is the #1 question we get from landlords when it comes to a tenant living in the property. Changing the locks. Can you change the locks when you move in? No. If you have to change the locks, say for example, it has all happened where maybe we've gotten locked out of our home, it's a long weekend and the landlord's not around and we have to call a locksmith. If the locksmith damages the lock and you have to replace it, you must immediately get a hold of your landlord and give them a copy of the key. If you don't do that, that falls under one of the tenant's covenants or must-dos. You have interfered with the rights of the landlord by changing the locks. And nobody wants to be put in that situation, even if it's an accident. So make sure if it does happen, you give your landlord a copy of the key. The entry by landlord. Again, a landlord is required to give a 24-hour written notice before entering the rental property or your home. They're not allowed to just come in. They must issue that appropriate notice. Appropriate meaning it's the correct way that they can let you know they're coming in. And remember, they have to say what they're coming in to do, when they're coming to do it, and the time frame. So if it's going to be, they're coming in to say repair a sink, they're coming in on Thursday, and they're going to be there between 2 and 4 p.m. Those are the 3 marks they want to hit with that, okay? And repair and maintenance problems. It's your responsibility as the tenant to let your landlord know if something's going wrong because you're living there. The landlord's not going to know unless you tell him. So again, leaky faucet, let your landlord know. If the toilet's running long, let your landlord know. The furnace is making some funny noises, let your landlord know. Or maybe that sliding glass window out to the balcony, it's sticking and it's making a funny noise when you slide it across. Let your landlord know. Even if it seems really small, it could be a big problem or it could be a really simple problem that your landlord's gonna be like, hey, thanks so much for letting me know. Everything that you think is not quite right, let your landlord know so it can be fixed. Because if you don't, it could be that you'd be responsible financially for an even bigger problem because you didn't tell your landlord in time and it escalated or it became way worse, and we never want that. Rent increases. A rent increase happens when the rent has to go up. So if your landlord comes to you and says, you lived here for 3 months, we're in a fixed term lease, I'm going to increase the rent. That's not okay. Like I said, fixed term, it's fixed. Nothing changes between the start date and the end date. It can only be once that fixed term ends that your landlord can increase the rent. If you're on a month-to-month or periodic tenancy, your landlord has to give you 3 months notice before increasing your rent. In Alberta, there is no limit to how far a landlord can increase rent. But we encourage our members who are landlords in the community to be very reasonable and only increase on what is necessary. And a lot of them haven't been doing that lately because of the situation at hand, which is really good. We wouldn't agree with a rent increase right now. And landlord-tenant relationships, or relations, pardon me. The relationship and the relations between yourself and your landlord are very important. Like I said, it even has a special name, a tenancy. So keeping that intact, and remember that they're there because they're renting you your home. So if you're having a problem with your home, you let them know. At the same token, you want to be courteous. There's no need to bring in any bad attitudes or nasty language on either side from landlord or tenant. But keeping it harmonious and a good working relationship is so very important. And it can make happy tenancies, happy tenants, happy landlords. Next slide, please. So when you're moving out, This is another question we get. What do? How do you go about moving out? Well, the first thing is you want to give notice. With a periodic or month-to-month tenancy, you only have to give 1 month's notice, and you have to do it in writing. So you write out, I'm moving out on this date, let's say October 31st. As an example, I am leaving October 31st. Now in Alberta, you have to leave at 12 o'clock noon. So it doesn't matter what date you're leaving, but you have to be out at 12 o'clock noon. That is the law. For a fixed term tenancy, it's a little bit different because fixed term, start date, end date, but you have the option at that end date to either renew the lease agreement, so renew that contract, let it roll over to month, because it automatically does that if no action is taken but payment of rent by you, the tenant, or you just end, you move out. There's no notice required, but we do recommend if you don't want to live there after that final day on your lease, on that last day of the lease agreement, tell your landlord, because then they can get it ready to re-rent it and you have the time to clean it up and move out properly. We usually recommend about 6 weeks to 3 months before that end date. And we tell landlords to approach their tenants when it comes time to do so. But if your landlord hasn't said anything and you want to get going, you don't need to wait. Just contact your landlord and say, we're not going to renew, we'd like to leave. The cleaning list. As I said, when moving in, the landlord may give you a cleaning list when you move in that says, here's what I expect the property to be handed back to me. When it's no longer your home and it becomes the rental property again, this is how I'd like it returned to me. Go through that cleaning list and follow it. Because that security deposit, that's going to come into play when we get down to number 5. And I'll talk a little bit more about it then. The walkthrough inspection. So we did a walkthrough inspection when you moved in. And just like that video said, any damages that are not listed on that move-in inspection, you're going to be responsible for if it shows up on that final move-out inspection. Okay? So going through that, again, take pictures. If you have any questions, ask those questions. You are allowed to take pictures. You're allowed to ask questions. You're allowed to say, hey, no, that scratch was there. I have a picture of that from when I moved in. You can say that. Don't just assume because you're doing the move out that you don't have a voice. Use your voice. You also want to make sure through this move out inspection that you have it cleaned up ahead of time with a clean list. If there are any damages that you're aware of ahead of time, let your landlord know. And when you get there, it can be notated appropriately on that inspection report. And again, don't be afraid to bring up anything that you feel is a concern. And again, I can't stress this enough. Take those pictures. Giving up possession. That happens after the final move out. And that's when you hand your keys back to the landlord. Your landlord might say, leave them on the counter, I'll get them when I'm done. They may say, leave them in the mailbox, because maybe you have a few more things to move out after that move out inspection. Whatever agreed upon way to return the keys is how you should do it. If you want to make sure the landlord gets it, take a picture of wherever you leave the keys and just let them know this is where I've left them. The security deposit. So the security deposit is meant for 3 things. Very important that you know, that you remember this. It's meant for damages. So anything that appears on that move out inspection report that wasn't there when you moved in. And remember, damage can be purposeful or accidental. Doesn't matter, it's still damage. It's meant for monies owed. If you have any outstanding rent or any fees, or if you have any utilities, that's where that comes in. That's monies owed. And then the third one, which is so important, is the cleaning costs. If you leave the rental property when it's no longer your home in a state, in a mess, you can expect to have a deduction on your security deposit to have that cleaned up. And the rule of thumb is you are not going to get your security deposit when you move out. The landlord has 10 days to return the security deposit minus any deductions and a statement of account. And when you move out, take all of your belongings. The landlord has rules they have to follow when it comes to things that are left behind, but If you don't take it with you, you may not get it back. Okay, very, very important that you do that. Because something that means a lot to you might not mean a lot to anybody else, and you may not retrieve it. Next slide, please. So all in all, when you're renting in Alberta, the number one thing is be knowledgeable. Everything I've talked about today and the wonderful resources with the Immigrant Services Calgary, it's there for you to utilize. It's there for you to learn from and become a great tenant that has a great relationship with their landlord. That's what you want. That's what everybody wants. That's what all landlords want, is a great, knowledgeable tenant. That is what you want to be. So you want to know your rights and responsibilities, and you want to know what your landlord's rights and responsibilities are. So what are your covenants and what are your landlord's covenants? And remember, you are renting a home, not a place or a unit. We call it that in here because that's industry terms. When it comes to you as the tenant, as the renter, that is your home. Take pride in it and take care of it. Take to the next slide. And so here's some information here on the screen of where you can contact. You can call Service Alberta Consumer Affairs. Other people just call it Service Alberta at the toll-free number, and they can answer those questions for you. If you're not sure if you're right or your landlord's right, if you're not sure if something your landlord has done is okay, or you have a question on what you should do next, these are the people you want to speak to. And the other thing they can do is if you have a bad situation, they can actually help you file a formal complaint if the problem is really serious. And if the problem is very serious and you need someone to settle a dispute, so settle the argument between yourself and your landlord, you go to somewhere, and like I said, we love acronyms. It's called the Residential Tenancy Dispute Resolution Service, or RTDRS. And it's great. They just opened up online, so you can do everything online now. It used to be you could only do it over the phone or via fax, and nobody has a fax machine anymore. So it's all online now. And this is an alternate to the courts, meaning you don't have to hire a lawyer. You can represent yourself. So these are all the tools that you need as a tenant, as well as the knowledge you're gaining from these videos to be a successful and knowledgeable and happy tenant. And that's what I've got to say for my presentation.
Well, I'm muted. Well, that's a mistake. Thank you so much. That was awesome. I wrote down some questions. I don't think there are any questions in the session. Yeah. So my first question is, what is the benefit of periodic versus a fixed lease? Why would you choose one and not the other?
So from a landlord's perspective, I'll start with that. A fixed term means that this tenant has agreed to rent for this period of time, and they've agreed to stay there. From a tenant's perspective, a fixed term means I am able to live here as long as I follow all the rules for this period of time. Nothing changes. My rent is not going to go up. The who's responsible for what is not going to change. Everything will remain fixed. A month to month is something you see mostly when you and your landlord have a great relationship. So again, it just keeps going and going. The benefit for a tenant though, is they only have to give 3 months with no reason. Sorry, not 3 months, 30 days, pardon me, 30 days notice with no reason to leave the rental property. And they have to just do that in writing. So there is a benefit in that sense, but there's no security because the landlord would only have to give 3 months notice to give that rental increase. So there's benefits on both sides.
Okay. Yeah, because I know that like sometimes I like to have a fixed one so that I know my rent's not going to increase. But other times it's almost more convenient to have a periodic one because I love to travel. So sometimes maybe I just need to leave my apartment within a month and go somewhere else.
Absolutely. It offers freedom with that one. If you're planning to stay put for a while, a fixed term is really beneficial. But if you're like, I'm not quite sure if I'm going to stay here, or I'm not sure if maybe you started a new job and you might get relocated, that happens too. And so having periodic would be an option. So it's dependent on what works best for your landlord and yourself, and what's your landlord's requirement.
What happens if I break a fixed lease early?
Ooh, so it's a very good question, and it's something that happens quite a bit. The biggest thing is you as a tenant need to know, if you break your lease, you are still responsible for your lease. So your landlord may have something in the contract, in the lease agreement, that says, if you break your lease, you're responsible for the rent until a new tenant is found, or when the lease date comes to that end. And you might also be responsible for any re-rental fees, so advertising. You also may be responsible for paying a lease break fee, which some people charge a month's rent, some people charge half a month's rent. So there's quite a bit of financial impact, especially if you're going to rent another place at the same time, that could come at you if you do break the lease early.
Yeah, I guess sometimes you can't help it though. Like you got a new job and you have a fixed term lease.
Yeah.
What are you going to do? I guess you just got to pay those penalties. Those fees.
And you can also talk to your landlord. That's why having such a great relationship with your landlord, where you're able to communicate and you're able to say that. Landlords may be a little bit more lenient. They may also hold you to the full extent of that lease. So it's just having a conversation and seeing what is the best outcome for everybody in this.
I actually had the kind of that experience. Like we bought a place, and the day that we were going to move into our new place and our renting overlapped. And I was like, can you just give me 1 month? Can we just like leave 1 month early from our fixed lease? And they said no. And they said we'd have to pay our rent. So we just pushed back our time. But yeah, I thought, oh, like I have a good relationship, but sometimes it's just, that is your contract and that's what you have to follow.
I always remind people, it's like when they get, when they have a service, like they've signed a contract for your cell phone. If you try to leave your cell phone plan early to go to somewhere else that maybe has a better deal, or maybe they don't have great service where you live, you still may be responsible for that contract. So it's the same idea in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So many times you mentioned writing. Everything should be in writing. Your landlord should give you notice 24 hours before in writing. You should get everything in writing, your inspection report, everything. Why? Why should they get everything in writing?
It is so important to get everything in writing. And this is going to sound very scary when I say it, but I promise it's not. If, for example, something goes really wrong and you end up going to court, whether it's the RTDRS, the provincial court, or the Court of Queen's Bench, you will be asked to provide documentation or evidence that this is, this is the issue. Having everything in writing shows, it gives that documentation, it gives a timeline to show whose argument is right. That's what it can do. The other thing is too, it's just like, again, you buy a refrigerator and you have maybe the instruction manual and you keep the receipt with it because maybe there's a warranty. It's just a good practice to have. Document everything. Even if you have text messages or emails, having them available so you can pull them out later on. Just that documentation is so very important, especially if a problem happens. And we never want that to happen. And it doesn't always, but being prepared if it does is very important.
That's good advice. I actually teach newcomers as well. And I always tell them to write things. Yes. Like even if you're quitting a job, anything, write it in an email. Then you have proof that you sent that and they received it, right? So even an email, but in a lot of other cultures, just verbal is okay. So your landlord says, yo, Becca, I'm going to come to your apartment tomorrow and I'm just going to like come in and fix the sink. Is that okay? And you say, okay, but then they come in and they damage something or do something, then I have nothing in writing to show they said they were coming. So they have no proof too.
It's true. And I tell landlords this, that document. You should create a paper trail a mile long by the time the tenant moves out. That's what should be done. And again, there is a cultural aspect to it here in Canada. To create those paper trails, but they're very, very, very handy if you need them.
Exactly. Yes. And so the other thing I wrote was on a lease, you said there's sometimes some extra things that your landlord can put in. What are some things that are okay for your landlord to put into your lease or your contract and say, you can't do this, you can do this? What can they add and what can't they add?
Okay, so what they can add are things like things that would protect the property. So they can put in there, you're not allowed to smoke. And they could say they could say you're only allowed to smoke on the balcony. They could say you can't smoke at all. They could also say that in terms of cannabis, they can say you're not allowed to smoke cannabis in this building or even on the property. They could tell you you're not allowed to have pets. Or, like I touched on, they could tell you you have to have tenant insurance. So those are things that they could put in there. What they can't put in there are things like before the fixed term tenancy ends, you have to give me 90 days notice before you move out. That's not allowed. Like I said, notice is not required, but we suggest it or we recommend it. But they can't put in the lease that they have to give notice. They also can't put in the lease, say you signed a periodic or month-to-month lease. You can't put in there that you're not only allowed to give me 30 days notice, you have to give me 3 months notice. That's not allowed. Anything that the Act or the Residential Tenancies Act, the RTA states, a landlord cannot put something in there that would contradict it or go against what it said. That's pretty much that. If a tenant's ever wondering if something's okay to have in a lease, contacting Service Alberta is an absolute must.
Sounds good. Yeah. So they can't put anything that breaks the law, basically. You know
it.
what? I think that I should only give 2 weeks notice.
Yes. Or say I'm allowed to come in anytime I want, as long as it's the day Wednesday and I wear blue. You can't put something in like that. You got to give the proper notice for it. So things like that, a landlord can't put in. If it doesn't feel right, ask. That's my suggestion on that. But yeah, like I was saying before, Rebecca tapped out. It is very important that when you read the lease with your landlord, if you have any questions, ask them. If you need clarification, ask. There's no harm in asking, and there's no such thing as a stupid question. Never be afraid to ask a question. So again, if you're reading your lease and something just doesn't make sense, ask. Look through it. If say a term doesn't make sense or the wording doesn't make a lot of sense, ask your landlord why it is worded this way or what the actual meaning is. If something you don't think applies to you, make note of that. But if you're not comfortable signing it and you'd like someone to be there maybe to interpret it for you or to reread it with you to offer that support, you can absolutely ask for that to happen. Most landlords are more than happy to allow more than just the people signing the lease to come with to make sure that everything is covered, but never be afraid to ask any questions about the lease that you're signing. That's really important.
Sounds good. I got kicked out for a second. Did Eric ask that question? Yeah. Okay. Sorry. I think my internet was getting like shaky and then it was like, okay, bye.
Now for the first time in a while. So
it's great. Yeah, exactly. Maybe I just needed to reset it. Yeah. Yeah. But that's a great, so the question must have been like, can you have someone come with you? Of course. It's like, I would definitely say that you should bring an interpreter because it is a lot of legal paperwork that if you can't understand, you're signing your name on. So
absolutely. Yeah. And again, like I was saying, there's no such thing as a silly question or a stupid question. I know for me, I would much rather have someone ask me something up front than it become a big problem later on.
Yeah, I guess you don't want it to get like make your relationship with the landlord really bad. Like, what do you mean? I signed here, but I didn't really understand. And yeah, you can't really say that later, I guess. But
true, and it has caused a lot of issues for different landlords and tenants, and that's why groups like yours are so important when they provide that education so that people know A, who they can talk to, and B, it's okay to ask questions.
Yeah, ask lots of questions. Yes. Don't sign anything till you really understand something.
You gotta know, you gotta cross your T's and dot your I's before you sign it. I agree.
Yes, because at the end, you can't say, I didn't understand as a legal argument.
That's true. You can't take it back. So
Yeah, exactly.
where you put your name.
So I wanted to ask about like screening. So what questions can they ask in a screening before they rent to you, and what can they not ask?
So a landlord cannot ask anything that would seem like they'd be discriminatory against you. So nothing where they could say a leading question where, are you married? Things like that. Or what is your sexual orientation? Or where are you originally from? If they're asking that in a casual conversation, fine. But if they're asking you to put it on paper, not as okay. The other things that they can ask you for, they can ask you for your full legal name. They can ask you for your birth date. They can ask you for your social insurance number, but they can't demand it. They can ask you for it, but if you choose not to give it to them, or you don't have one yet, that's okay. You don't have to give it to them. They may also ask you for a copy of your driver's license. They're not going to keep it. They just need to validate or make sure you are who you say you are.
What if you have no driver's license?
Anything that is a picture ID. So if you had your passport, or say you had a status card, or you had an Alberta ID, any form of picture ID that validates or makes sure you are who you say you are, will be sufficient. They can also ask if they can run a credit check. So a tenant credit check. They may run it, they may choose not to, they may look at the situation. If you are new to Canada, you may not have Canadian credit. If that's the case, you can let them know. They may still want to run a credit check, and if you sign off on it, they will. But if they can't do anything with it because you're brand new to the country, they may ask for a co-signer. And a co-signer is somebody who has Canadian credit, who has a good financial history, and has a stability in Canada that you don't currently have because you're so new. That's okay too. So anyone, a trusted family member who's maybe been here longer than you, or a trusted friend who would be willing to put their name on the lease with you, is absolutely acceptable as well.
Sounds good. Yeah, that's a lot, I guess. But yeah, definitely. I think a permanent resident card as well, probably they could use.
Work as well, yeah.
Yeah. A lot of newcomers don't have credit. So
No.
Does that work against them when they're getting rental units?
It shouldn't, because there are other options like having a cosigner or a guarantor, or showing proof of income, whether that means it's a bank statement or a letter from your employer that shows that you do have an income of sorts or employment. But in terms of not having a credit history in Canada, it shouldn't impede you or stop you from being able to get a rental property or a new home.
Okay, I have another question that actually came from Facebook. Can they ask if you have children, even if the building is child friendly?
Okay.
Even if the building is child friendly.
Okay. Even if the building is child friendly, the landlord will want to know how many people are going to live in the property. So if they say, how many children do you have? And you say 3, and they say, okay, I can't rent to you. That's a big warning sign. But if you say, I have 3 children, and they say, okay, great, let's keep going, that's okay. You just don't want, you want to make sure that you're not being discriminated against, or they're not purposely not giving you the rental property because of something that you are or you have.
Mm-hmm. Can they say how many people can live in an apartment? So if I bring, say I invite my mother from another country and she brings my sister who has 5 children, can they say how many people? So if I can only afford a 1-bedroom apartment, can I have 8 people living in my 1-bedroom apartment?
At this point right now, it falls under the minimum health and safety standards. So that would determine how many people are allowed to live in each unit. And every unit and every home is going to be different. So it also falls under any fire codes and making sure that the appropriate amount of people are living in the property. But the landlord will want to know before you move in how many people you plan to have live there. So the lease agreement that we have, it says who are the lease signers, so that's anyone over the age of 18, and then other occupants, people who don't contribute or help pay the rent. Those are other occupants, so children, or if you had an elderly parent or relative living with you, that was okayed by the landlord. So the landlord's going to tell you, if it's a 1-bedroom apartment, and it's under maybe 500 square feet, they're more than likely not going to rent to somebody who has that many people coming with them. And that's not because that they're, you know, being discriminatory. It's because they're not allowed to.
Okay. So what if, so I think sometimes like people have their family members come and stay with them for 6 months or something like that. Do they have to inform their landlord?
Yes. Generally in leases in Alberta, it says that if you have a guest staying for more than, let's say, 2 weeks, some say 2 weeks, some say a month, some say 10 days, just making sure you understand the time frame in your lease. If someone is coming to stay with you for longer than the time frame outlined in your lease, you generally have to tell your landlord in writing. So whether it's an email or a text message or handwritten, even on a napkin, we've had that happen too, asking, can my family come stay with me for this amount of time? Yes. But if your landlord says, I'm going to have to increase the rent and you're in a fixed term tenancy, big no, he's not allowed to do that. So if he says, I don't know if we're going to be able to accommodate that many people in the property, having a conversation with him. But if he says, yes, great. Mom and dad and aunt and uncle could come visit.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah. I was wondering, I'll ask one final question and I think there's no more questions. I haven't seen any other ones, but my final question is, what are the basic health and safety measures that a landlord has to fulfill? So like if there's like a hole in my floor or there's a leak in the window is always open or something, what do they have to fulfill for basic health and safety?
Basic health and safety standards is that all the walls are enclosed. There's no exposed fiberglass insulation or anything along those lines. That the kitchen, there will always be a functioning kitchen and at least one functioning bathroom in the rental property. That if there's any mold, mildew, or anything along those lines, it gets taken care of right away, and that the landlord is providing the safe housing the entire time the tenant is living there. It's a fairly interesting piece of legislation or law, and I would recommend if anyone has questions about it, you can actually just Google Alberta Minimum Health and Safety Standards. I would recommend everyone read through it because there could be something that's applicable or it's something that's meaningful to you right now. It could be something just to have in your back pocket. I can't get into all of it right now, but the basic gist of it is that it's a safe housing. It's safe housing, and you have access to the kitchen and the bathroom, and there's no exposed insulation.
Okay, so it doesn't have anything to do with like heating or anything like that?
It does have to do with, the landlord is required to keep the heating at 72 degrees Fahrenheit. That's where it's supposed to be kept, as well as, I'm just trying to remember that one. I have to
put you on the spot.
Okay, I have to reread it. This just means that it's part of my nighttime reading now. But there are regulations on how it is supposed to be kept. So if you're ever in a situation with an up and down duplex, there's a lot of those in Calgary. If you say you share a thermostat with the people upstairs and they keep putting it down to say 52 degrees Fahrenheit, making sure it is at minimum 72.
72, okay. It's kind of cool that they chose like a limit,
it's like
72 degrees.
In there.
But is that like 20 degrees? 20?
Around there. That's the minimum.
That.
That's the minimum it's allowed.
That's the minimum. Okay. It's nice when you have something you can change yourself.
Yes, it is. Yeah. And most of the time you can, especially with Calgary's secondary suite program and having everything separated. But there are some houses that are grandfathered into this where they have to share the thermostat with up and down or side to side, and it's just keeping it 72.
Yeah. And I actually have one more question. So you said that the landlord has to take care of, there's a leaky faucet or like things like that. What does a tenant have to take care of? Like if they damage something or a toilet or something?
So if the leaky faucet happens and it's been there for a while and it happens just due to use, that's one thing. But if, say, for example, you accidentally shut your stove or your oven really hard and that glass breaks, the tenant's responsible for that. That's damage. If, say, for example, you have a little one who likes to put things in the toilet and flush it down and it backs up, You're going to be responsible for the plumber and any water damage that happens as a result of that. If you're, not turning on that fan in your bathroom and you're having steamy showers and there's some mildew growing, you're responsible for that. So it's having a good conversation with your landlord, because sometimes the landlord wants to be fully responsible for, say, the furnace. They'll come in and do the changing of the furnace filters. They may not want the tenant to be responsible for that, but they might look at something else and go, okay, these are all brand new appliances. If anything is wrong with them, you're going to be responsible for it. If they're older appliances that just due to long use, they might kick the bucket, so to speak. And if that happens, then the landlord should be taking care of that.
Okay, sounds good.
Case
Case by case. Yeah, I know. I'm like, every situation is different. I hate saying that, but it's kind of true. Every situation's different. Every landlord's different. Yeah. Okay, well, I think that's it. I don't see any more questions, Erica. So I'm assuming that on Facebook, that was all the questions. Thank you so much, Nikki. That was amazing. And I have even more questions, but we only have an hour. It's so nice to just talk.
Phone number,
I'll just call you. Okay, well, thank you so much. And anyone on the Facebook Live, if you want to reach out to me to ask questions, I can try to forward them on to whoever can help you answer them. And this video will be posted on our Facebook, so you can watch it later if you want to watch some nighttime video, I guess, or something. And next week, we actually have another Facebook Live. So we're debuting our next video, which is a fraud and scams video. And it actually ties into our rental thing because it has a rental scam included in it. So yeah, that will be next week on Wednesday at 2 p.m. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye.